listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. So I'm delighted this week to welcome Sue Dyson onto the podcast. Sue doesn't actually need an introduction, but I am going to give her one. As we all know, she specialises in lameness and poor performance throughout a long vet career. And people may not know, but Sue's actually a rider. She's ridden to high level, and she's also produced horses to the top national level in both eventing and show jumping. And these horses have subsequently competed at European and World Championships and even the Olympic Games. She's a British Horse Society Instructor in both teaching and stable management. She worked for 37 years at the Animal Health Trust in Newmarket, where she ran a clinical referral service for lameness and poor performance. And this attracted clients from all over the UK, Ireland, and continental Europe. And Sue has now become an independent consultant. She has published a phenomenal more than 450 papers, which for anyone who's in the scientific world will recognise that as a fantastic achievement. And these publications have obviously concerned lameness, diagnostic imaging, and she's also lectured on this worldwide. She's very passionate about the interrelationships between horses and riders, so that we can promote a better understanding of the interactions between training, riders, tack and horses, and how horses adapt to musculoskeletal discomfort. So welcome, Sue. I'm so thrilled that you found time to come onto the podcast.
It's a very real pleasure.
So where did it all start for you with horses? Did you ride as a child?
Oh, yes. I was a typical pony mad child, riding from the age of 5, having my own pony from the age of 8, spending all the time I could at the local riding school and then at dealers' yards. So riding lots of different sorts of horses. So, yes, it's been a passion, a lifelong passion.
Wow. And did you always want to be a vet?
No, absolutely not. No, that was a very late decision halfway through the sixth form at school. I was doing the subjects I liked rather than the subjects I needed to be doing. And I suddenly thought, what the heck am I going to do? And then I thought, well, I could combine my interest in horses with something academic. And then being an equine veterinarian was a process of going to vet school, not to be a vet, but to be an equine veterinarian who was going to do lameness.
Oh, okay. So whilst you were there, spending several years at uni being taught all the veterinary science, how was it for you that you had to learn about dogs and cats and chickens and everything else?
It was actually okay because it teaches you the basic principles of clinical evaluation. And actually, the small animal course was far, far, far better taught than the equine course.
Oh,
Yes, the equine course, we never even got to laminitis. It was
wow.
very non-hands-on and not very good in retrospect. And from the chickens and stuff, you learned a little bit more about husbandry and the importance of the welfare side of managing animals, which has come to the forefront more now with respect to horses, but has always been there with respect to farm animals.
Wow. Yeah. So why lameness? What drew you to lameness in particular?
Well, I think that having owned horses, the most common reason for them having any time off from work was because they were lame. So, and as a rider and as a competitor, that to me was very frustrating if you didn't know what was going on. So it seemed a natural progression.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you are known in that field for being the expert in orthopedic changes and other changes in horses. So when you first set out going into this field, what was the culture like amongst the other vets, amongst the other experts, the riders? What were people thinking about lameness?
Well, you have to remember that when I graduated, there were very few women in the equine profession, and it looked like a completely closed door unless you had influence, which I didn't have. So I was very fortunate to win a scholarship to go to the United States. And I worked at the University of Pennsylvania for 2 years as an intern. And that gave me a phenomenal exposure to all sorts of experts. And I happened to meet up with various other specialists who were based locally, who exposed me to upper level horses and lameness and how to investigate it properly. So when I came back to the UK, I kind of had this basic grounding about how to investigate lameness. And then, having been a rider, I felt that we were missing the plot if we didn't see horses ridden as part of poor performance or lameness evaluations. Because if a rider said to me, well, I'm having difficulties in going into canter and maintaining canter, and the only thing I could see from the ground in hand or on the lunge was this very subtle right forelimb lameness on the lunge on a right rein, that didn't fit with difficulties in going into canter. And yet when I saw the horses ridden, I could see a completely different picture. And that, to me, was very, very important, that you needed to see the horse doing the things that it found difficult and investigate that, not an esoteric right forelimb lameness only seen on the right rein on a concrete surface, which was probably irrelevant. And then my principle was always to determine the source of pain, which we can do through clinical evaluation, but also the use of nerve blocks to find out where the pain is coming from. And there was quite a lot of resistance to this when I first was practicing, because people didn't do that, in part because the local anesthetic solutions available at that time used to create localized soft tissue swellings on the horse's legs, which people hated, which I hadn't experienced when I was in the United States. So I got involved with a pharmaceutical company based in Sweden that had the same sort of local anesthetic solution, and they provided me with that. And then I could document that we were not getting any soft tissue reactions. And then that drug got licensed in the UK because of what I'd done. And that built on to the fact that vets now felt more willing to use the local anesthetic solution because there were no adverse effects. So slowly there was progression and acceptance that this was a way to progress with lameness evaluation. But it's taken a very long time to persuade vets that they should see horses ridden. And some vets still don't see horses ridden because they don't understand the need to, because they've never been taught that they need to or how to examine horses being ridden.
That's just now in the 21st century, hearing that's just crazy, isn't it? And all vets, whether they see the horse ridden or not, use the nerve blocks usually to assess lameness. So we've come an amazing way through, your own research. And throughout this time then, were you still riding and producing horses? You still had that on the side as well as all the veterinary work?
I did, yes. And I think that was very important to me because, one, it put me out in the public. So when I came back from the States, nobody knew who I was, but I was fortunate enough to produce several horses from novice through to advanced level. So the commentators got to know who I was, and they would make reference to me when for example, I was going cross country, which would attract clients, and then clients talk to each other. So by word of mouth, the client base escalated with some very good riders, which were really fun to work with. So yes, it was a mutually compatible thing to be doing both, although sleep was short and my diet wasn't very good either.
Brilliant. So did you event or show jump or do a bit of both?
I did a bit of both. I think that I always felt that eventing was my passion, but I felt that the horses needed to go out and show jump at a higher level at which they were required to do in eventing in order to be better in show jumping sphere. And I always wanted to do things well. Didn't necessarily need to win, but I wanted to do things well. So going out competitively show jumping was part of that training process. But I was very lucky that one of the horses was extraordinarily talented and went to grade A quite quickly, as well as being an advanced event horse.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Pretty special.
Yeah. And would you say then that was your horse of a lifetime?
No, I've had 3 horses.
Oh.
So he was the first one. He was McGinty. So he then subsequently was sold and won the Junior European Show Jumping Championships twice with 2 different sisters. Then there was Kinvara, who was bought as a rearer and was challenging, but he went to World Equestrian Games, European Championships, 2 Olympics, jumping clear every time. Badminton, Burley. And then there was Severn, who was an advanced event horse by the age of 7 and was sold to the Dutch, and he went to a World Equestrian Games as well. So I've been incredibly lucky. I've had 3 superstars.
Oh, fabulous. And let's just talk a little bit about, going back to the lameness and the fact that you have this very strong relationship with horses. You put together the 24 behaviors. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came across, how that came about?
I was intensely frustrated that owners were not recognizing lameness. They were blaming the horse, or the trainers were blaming them, and therefore problems were going unrecognized for too long. And the longer a problem has been present, the more difficult it is to resolve, because the horse develops secondary movement disorders and other muscle wastage, and you get into this vicious circle.
Yeah.
And I was also aware that some veterinarians were not adequately aware of pain-related problems. And this to me was intensely frustrating. And I felt we were letting the clients down. And I had observed so many horses before and after performing nerve blocks and seen the transformation, not only in their quality of movement and the resolution of lameness, but also in their willingness to work and their behavior. So I was quite convinced that we would be able to define a number of behaviors which we would see more commonly in lame horses than in non-lame horses, and therefore provide a different tool by which owners, riders, trainers, saddle fitters, veterinarians, whatever, would be better able to recognize the presence of discomfort in horses and therefore initiate investigation sooner rather than later. And so I was very fortunate to meet on a ski lift in America a veterinary behaviorist who had a background in horses as well. So she came on board and we worked together. And that was quite important because we needed to get the acceptance of the behaviorists, the specialist behavior people, that what we were doing was something which was kosher. So we needed to prove this. So we took a group of lame horses and we took a group of non-lame horses and created this tool, which is a series of 24 behaviors, each with strict definitions. So, for example, mouth opening with separation of the teeth for 10 seconds or more. And we've demonstrated very clearly that if a horse shows 8 or more of these 24 behaviors, it is going to have musculoskeletal pain. It doesn't tell me where the pain is coming from. It just tells me it's got musculoskeletal pain. And we know that these behaviors are not habitual by and large, because if we take away the pain by nerve blocks, we see immediate resolution of most of these behaviors or a reduction in their frequency of occurrence. So it's not habitual. There is a causal relationship between the behaviors and the presence of pain.
And I suppose that's what I was going to ask you, that, some horse owners or people around horses will say, well, that horse is just grumpy, or that horse is just marish. And like you say, if you do the nerve blocks and those behaviors disappear, then it isn't them just being grumpy, is it? And things like that. Other kind of ways that we anthropomorphize horses, it's inaccurate, isn't it? A lot of the time.
Completely. But we're living in an archaic sport, I think. When I grew up being taught that the horses were grumpy, unwilling, lazy, stressy, without anybody questioning that this could be anything other than normal for horses.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is normal for horses. If horses are treated appropriately, managed appropriately by us, and also they are pain-free, they do not show these behaviors. Now, some are more extravagant movers than others, obviously. They have different athletic abilities, but that should not alter their behavior. And I think that the whole equine world has been dominated by these myths that these attitudes towards horses are normal, when in fact they're not.
Yeah, and just ride on, because like you say, they're misbehaving, they're being lazy, they're trying to get the better of you. All of these things out there, they know what they're doing it on purpose. They're purposefully obstructive in some way. Yeah.
Yes, I don't think we should undermine their intelligence, because I think they are intelligent, but to suggest that they are doing premeditated things to annoy us is ridiculous.
Yeah. So These 24 behaviours now, how widely are they used as a checklist by other professionals?
I think it's been a gradual progression.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we started, there was a lot of opposition because they said, "Oh, Sue, she's just being crazy." And there was a lot of resistance, particularly, I would say, with the older male members of the veterinary profession.
Yeah.
But things are changing, and they are changing globally. So
Yeah.
I say that this piece of work, or this series of pieces of work that we've done, have been accepted worldwide and are being used increasingly by riders and trainers and saddle fitters and physiotherapists and veterinarians. But there are still resistant groups. There's no doubt about that. So if you were to take, for example, the upper level coaches in this country,
Mm.
you still hear them too much blaming the horse or the rider. So we've got a few more hills, if not a mountain, to climb.
So I want to just give a plug to that video that does show people the 24 behaviours. It's called 24 Behaviours of the Ridden Horse in Pain, Shifting a Paradigm in Lameness. And it's on YouTube and it's free and it's only about 35 minutes. But I think it's so important for horse owners to see that video because it's beautifully produced. And there's a rider there, and I've forgotten her name, but she has a horse that has a problem, and it takes you through the behaviours, doesn't it? And shows you how then you can't locate the problem from the 24 behaviours, or certainly not very easily, but then you move on to do the nerve blocking, and you can isolate where the pain's coming from. So I will put that in the description box so people can have a little watch of that. So I suppose I want to ask you the opposite then. Can we tell when horses are happy in their work, when they're enjoying what they're doing? Can we do that at all?
Well, I think we can, because it's almost the reverse of the 24 behaviours. And we did actually do a study when we looked at horses in competition. So we had well over 1,000 horses, approximately 805 of which I thought were working comfortably. And so we were able to demonstrate the attitudes of those horses. So they would generally have their ears forward or their ears rotated to the side, for example. They wouldn't swish their tails continuously. Their head position would be still. They would willingly respond to cues. So I think we can recognize it. We just need to be aware and have our eyes open and look at what is in front of us. Because I think that, again, it's changing a mindset of people so that they observe and think about what they're observing. And if a horse does not want to do something, they ask themselves why, rather than trying to make the horse do something. So yes, I think we can recognize those pain-free horses if we look for them, because they do look so much more engaged in their work. And I do believe happiness is an anthropomorphic term again, but I do think that they are willingly working with us, cooperating with us, because I think they get stimulation, they get chemicals released in the brain that make them feel good. It's like us. If we go for a run, you get release of endorphins and you feel better. You might feel tired, your muscles might ache, but you still feel better mentally. And we have evidence that the same applies to the horse.
Fabulous. I mean, anecdotally, I know from my own horses that they just have a spring in their step. You know, if you put some jumps out and it's a horse that loves jumping, I know that horse is ready to go, probably more ready than I am. And I think as horse owners and people who are around their own horses, or they're very trained in looking at other horses, I think that we can tell when a horse is content, whether it's at rest or at work. And I really do think that we almost need to make sure we know those behaviours as well as the ridden pain behaviours as well. So what, I suppose that leads us on to your second film that's just been produced and is now on YouTube, which is, again, a beautifully produced film. What was the incentive to produce that film? It's called, for anyone that's not seen it, Horses and the Science of Harmony.
Well, my co-producer, Catherine Lauritsen, and I were brainstorming after the production of the first documentary. And I said, I think we really need to do something which demonstrates that horses can work comfortably, but we need to do it telling a story. And we need to, we need to introduce science to educate people about how horses learn and how they use their various senses. But we can't just produce a factual based film because that doesn't draw people in. So you have to tell a story. But the real aim was just to demonstrate that we can have, as people, a harmonious relationship with our horse. But that involves not just how we ride it, but how we manage it on a day-to-day basis and pay attention to its mental well-being and its physical well-being. So those were the incentives.
Yeah, and then the film starts with the story, opens with Bubby Upton, doesn't it? And her story of her fall, but also how I think the love of the horse gave her that mental ability to just keep going and defy the doctors and medical science and get back riding, not just get back on a horse, but get back to top level eventing. What was it like to work with her?
It was pretty amazing, actually. I went and spent, I selected the cast, as it were, and I went and spent a day with her, and I was very struck by the empathy she had with her horses and with her staff. And I think that counts for a lot. She didn't just take people for granted. It was a lovely atmosphere. And I very much enjoyed her interaction with the horses and her attention to detail. And I realized that she was very articulate as well. So that was an added bonus. So when we did the film, she was non-scripted. She had no idea what questions we were going to ask, which bits of the day days we would be filming. So this was just her in action. And I would ask her questions, or Catherine would ask her questions. And the answers she gave were almost always a lead in to some scientific area that we wanted to introduce. So we were very lucky with her selection. And she is such a positive person, and her resilience is quite remarkable.
So you go from Bubby, and I can't remember the order now, but you segue into the science, as you say, and we get to talk about or learn about the senses, the 5 senses that the horse has, and how much more refined they are than in us, which is incredible. I mean, one of the things that I found absolutely amazing was Janet Jones was describing how a horse can detect 5 single dandelion seeds on its skin. I mean, and we can't detect one. I mean, if a dandelion seed lands on you, you don't know about it unless you see it. So it's just incredible. So I suppose that takes us on as riders into thinking about our aids and the softness again of our aids. And I suppose we're coming back again to the welfare and the harmony of the horse as well. And was that your intention, to show that the horses are so able to use their senses, whether it's their hearing or their sight or whatever it might be, and for us then to appreciate them not only as animals but also as our partners?
Absolutely, because I think that for me, a harmonious relationship is if you're kind of feeling that you do everything empathetically together. But in order to do that with the horse, we have to understand what they are experiencing in their environments, which is not the same as what we're experiencing in our environments. So people, for example, can't understand why some horses are so reactive to clippers. But clippers emit ultrasonic sounds that are beyond our ability to hear. And it may be those sounds that are scary to the horse. And once you begin to understand those things, you can adapt the way you introduce clippers accordingly. And I think that deals everything we know about horses. We almost need to relearn, I think, with respect to better knowledge about their behavior and how animals learn. And it's I don't want to go down the avenue of learning theory, because I think that confuses people. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Just reward the horse, or just apply a cue and remove it immediately, because that should be sufficient. And I think when we learn more about their sensitivity in terms of their sensitivity to touch, you can then appreciate why a light cue should be sufficient to communicate,
Yeah.
as long as it's clear enough to the horse and you're using different cues for different movements. So, and touch is also related to kind of the adaptation to your posture and your weight distribution. Because if they can adapt to a fly, how are they going to think about if you are a 70-kilo rider sitting off to one side? Of course, that's going to compromise the way they move and
Yeah.
predispose to the development of problems. So it brings together the horse's senses, the rider appreciating those senses and adapting accordingly, and also giving the rider some level of responsibility as a rider. They are an athlete in this partnership, and I think that sometimes gets overlooked, that
Yeah.
the riders don't take sufficient responsibility, both from how they are mentally approaching the job and also physically their readiness for the job.
Yeah, yeah. And that was on the video as well, isn't it? That's Charlie Unwin was saying so many riders who perhaps don't compete, perhaps they hack down the lane or they school at home, or perhaps they do compete, but they don't think of themselves as an athlete because they think that's the professional, the elite riders. And so they don't treat their bodies and their mind like a professional. And therefore they're not quite as prepared, if you like, to ride the horse. And that could be just from a practical point of view, that they would get more out of their riding if they did. But also it's the partnership, isn't it? That the horse would have to compensate for various lacks in the rider, whether that is that the rider is scared, or that the rider is, like you say, the posture is a little bit out of alignment. That these beautiful animals are so forgiving, really, that they will compensate for all our lacks.
Yeah, they're probably too forgiving, they're too compliant, and that's a bit because they are prey animals, so they've learned to conceal their obvious emotions and their obvious gait abnormalities because they don't want to be lunch for the lion. They
Yeah.
need to be able to hide these emotions.
And with these two videos that you've now put out, and with also the plethora of publications that you have behind you, do you feel that this is now a significant contribution to the buzzword of today, if you like, the social license?
Well, I think that the release of this second documentary is very timely, and that's coincidental because I think that there has been an escalation over the last 2 years, and particularly since in the lead up to the Olympics, it's become far more worldwide appreciated that horse sports may be in jeopardy. And I think this is just going a small step to educating people, and
Yeah,
that's really what we're doing. We're educating people through telling stories. And I think that that's an important aspect because however much you develop science, unless you can communicate the end results to the end user, it's almost a waste of time. It's very frustrating. And it's quite difficult to put across key messages to the end user, particularly because people's attention spans seem to be getting shorter and shorter. They read less. And so it, this type of media helps us to convey important messages, I think.
yeah. And I loved in the film that there were some top riders in there as well, people like Mary King, for instance, and Piggy March and so on. And you saw on the video that it isn't a job for them necessarily. It's a lifestyle, but it's also that they are so caring for their horses. They have a superb relationship with their horses, and they care about the horses deeply and their welfare. And I think, again, that comes across that these aren't machines, and this is the way the professionals, and if the professionals, they need their horses for their profession and they need their horses to do well, and they are turning out 24/7 or whatever it might be, then the rest of us can follow suit.
Yes, and I think it's almost a paradox that it's the top end of the equestrian sports that are under the limelight and are being criticised constantly. Whereas from a welfare perspective, I think it's at the bottom end that in actual fact, there's a far bigger welfare issue. And it's not because people don't love their horses, it's because they don't know enough about their horses and how they should be kept. And I appreciate that people have different circumstances under which they're going to keep their horses, and they've got all sorts of things to juggle in their lives. But nonetheless, I agree 100%. These top riders clearly care for their horses and they are passionate about them. But it is at the bottom end that we need to be educating even more than at the top end. And I think we have this kind of lack of unity within the equine world. You have the people who are criticizing the top end, and then you have the people who I call the horse huggers that are against bits, bridles, nosebands, shoes, and even riding horses. And I don't empathize with those people. I can see their point of view, but I feel that horses do benefit from the care that we give them, and they do benefit from training and being ridden. And then you have the bottom end who are trying hard, but often they're making mistakes just because they don't know. And we have to address that bottom end, and we have to address it from children onwards so that they are taught how we should be doing things better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so right, isn't it? I think a lot of people who own horses are doing their absolute best, but it might not be in line with your findings and the findings of other people for what suits the horse. And although they are domesticated, they still retain quite a lot of their wild nature as well, that we can somehow find a happy compromise so that we are caring for them in the best way, not that we can, but that the best way that we should be doing, if you like, rather than, well, I can't turn my horse out because I don't have time in the day or whatever it might be, or I don't want them to wreck rugs. That might be the best for one person, but it's not the best that person could actually do it a stretch. You know, I do feel that a lot of riders and horse owners, this is probably quite controversial, but they do it more for their own convenience than for the horses,
Yes,
horses'
they're
welfare.
sometimes misguided in that we could ask, does the horse need to have rugs on? Face an obesity crisis in horses, we could help to manage that obesity crisis if the horses had to use some of their body fat to keep warm, rather than being over-rugged. And if they're over-rugged, they are going to destroy their rugs, probably. Think about why are they doing these behaviors, that there generally is an underlying reason. And if we can understand that reason and change the situation in which the horse is, some of those behaviors may regress. And then there's a lot of peer pressure to do things, which is not necessarily the right peer pressure. But we can't underestimate the misconceptions that are put across. So when I see people asking questions on social media and the plethora of results that come through, some of which are completely misleading, it really concerns me that so many people are being influenced by others who don't really know. And this is a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And so I suppose to round off then, because these two documentaries are free, they're on YouTube, they're extremely accessible for everybody, and they're easy to watch. It's not like sitting down to watch a science lecture or anything like that. They're lovely to watch and so informative. And because, like you said, it's telling a story as well, both of the videos tell a story, then you put it in context and you're already, the cogs are whirring in your own mind because you're thinking, oh, right, well, I've come across that before. And hopefully then we can spread the word about these videos and help people to understand more and more about the horses. Are there any more videos in production or in the pipeline?
These cost money to produce. In serious amounts of money. I will have got nothing out of the production of this last video, despite the many hours put in for it.
Oh gosh.
So we are dependent on sponsorship. even we're planning on putting together bonus footage related to the most recent documentary. But even for that, we're seeking financial support to do it because
Yeah.
Catherine, it is her living to make films, and I can't expect her to do something for nothing. I can make the choice to do something for nothing, but I can't make that for Catherine, and she
Yeah.
is a key element in this team. So we have other ideas, yes, of what we would like to do, but we are dependent on resources.
Well, if I win the lottery, I'll let you know.
Please do.
Well, thanks ever so much, Sue. That has been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much. Thank you so much. I will put all the links down in the description boxes so people can watch the videos and learn so much more. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.